Good evening. I'm Paul at the Garland County Library in Hot Springs, and I'm here today with Steve Darnall, who is the host of a radio show in Chicago. Those were the days, dedicated to the golden age of radio. He also runs a magazine and website called does a variety of presentations and programs like the one we're about to watch, which is called A Beginner's Guide to the Golden Age of Radio. So if you're watching live and have questions or comments, don't be shy. But if you are shy, that's okay too, because I know Mr. Darnall here will let everyone know where they can contact him with those after the program. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve Darnall. So welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening. Hello out there in cyberspace. Let me bring myself down a little. There we are. Thank you so much to the library for bringing us all together tonight. I had been asked to describe this program, and I thought about it for a while, and of course the title was meant to be self-explanatory, A Beginner's Guide to the Golden Age of Radio. But the more I thought about it, that was the literal description. But the informal description of what we have for you tonight is a magic show. Now, obviously, when we're doing this virtually, it can't be a traditional magic show. Obviously, I cannot ask you to pick a card. I definitely cannot saw anyone in half. And even if I could, I wouldn't. But there will be magic here tonight. The difference is it's magic you're going to create for yourselves. And I will help as I can. And in a way, the more I thought about that, the more appropriate it seemed, because really, in a way, everything we're going to be talking about tonight is a sort of magic. You know, at the start of the 20th century, the only way most of us could listen to music was if we were standing next to someone else who was playing an instrument. And that changed, well, with the dawn of the phonograph record. Now, for the first time, it became possible for us to bring entertainers into our homes. It had always been the other way around up to that point. But now, you had a permanent document of Enrico Caruso or John McCormick. They might never actually come to your town, but thanks to records, they could be in your house. Wasn't perfect, you know, they were expensive, they broke easily. And of course, one of the things in the digital era that we take for granted is that we don't have to get up after 3 minutes to turn over a record. But in a way, the phonograph record prepared us for radio, and radio changed everything. Radio changed the way we listened. It changed the way we lived. It was a form of magic to 1920s America, because here was this device, this box that could pull sound out of the air, even if it was coming from the next town over or the next state over. And then, with the radio networks, the National Broadcasting Company and the Columbia Broadcasting System, the Mutual Broadcasting System, it became possible for us to share this listening experience, you know, so that someone could be speaking into a microphone in New York, and you could hear it in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And at the same time you were hearing it in Hot Springs, we could hear it in Chicago. And we were hearing it in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and St. Paul, Minnesota, and Salt Lake City, Utah. And now we could share this experience. You know, think about this. When George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States, there were 13 states, and it was 30 days before all of them got the news. By contrast, think of anything of the remotest importance that has happened in your lifetime, and how quickly you knew about it, and how quickly we all knew about it. And that's thanks to the work of radio. That said, this is not a technical talk. The reason I'm here, and I think the reason you're here, is because radio did something that no other mass media could do. It took what by rights should have been a drawback, that we couldn't see anything that was going on. But they turned that into a strength by combining words and sounds in such a way that those of us listening were inspired to create pictures using our imaginations. And the imagination is a staggeringly limitless place. And once something gets in there, it doesn't go away easily. And tonight, we're going to hear from some of the big shows and the big stars from the early years of radio, this period that is referred to as the Golden Age. And we're going to start with a satirist and a writer by the name of Stan Freberg. Now, some people may know Stan Freberg as a voice at Warner Brothers Cartoons opposite Mel Blanc. He also worked in radio for a number of years. He had his own radio show in the summer of 1957. He's probably best remembered for a series of records he did for the Capitol label in the 1950s in particular. Records like John and Marcia, St. George and the Dragnet, in which the story of St. George was told in the style of Dragnet. And then, of course, there were the parodies of then popular songs like Heartbreak Hotel and The Yellow Rose of Texas and Shaboom and The Great Pretender and C'est Si Bon. Well, in the 1960s, Stan did a record for Capitol called Freeburg Underground. And on that record, he took a few moments to remind us of what it was we lost when we gave up on radio. Maybe a slight delay.
And now we'd like to...
Mr. Freeburg?
Yes, who are you?
I'm Marianne Feemster. I'm 10 years old. I've been sitting in the audience.
Yes.
I've been thinking over what you said about how you're doing this because there aren't any more radio programs.
Yes.
Mr. Freeburg, what's a radio program?
Well, when you listen to the radio in the morning, what do you hear?
Disc jockeys and news, or sometimes news and disc jockeys. Is it possible to hear something else?
It was back in the 1940s, yes.
Back in the olden days?
Yeah. So there were what we call radio programs, like what we're doing here with actors and live musicians and sound effects men and guest stars.
Oh, you mean like a television program when the picture tube blows out?
Something like that, yes. Look, you could do things on radio, see, that you couldn't possibly do on television. My sound effects man and I will give you a demonstration right now.
Okay.
Okay, people, now when I give you the cue, I want the 500-foot mountain of whipped cream to be shoved into Lake Michigan, which has been drained and filled with hot chocolate. Then the Royal Canadian Air Force will appear overhead towing a 10-ton maraschino cherry, which will be dropped into the whipped cream to the cheering of 25,000 extras. All right, cue the mountain. Cue the Air Force. Cue the maraschino cherry. Okay, 25,000 cheering extras. Now, you want to try that on television?
I see what you mean.
Well, there is your first magic trick, ladies and gentlemen. And you made it happen with the help of Stan Freeburg and the sound effects man. And between you, for a moment, you got to envision what Lake Michigan would look like filled with hot chocolate. And that's part of what people talk about when they talk about the magic of radio, is, as obvious as it sounds, that radio was a medium that relied on sound. But it could use sound in such a way that it could allow listeners to see things in the mind's eye that weren't there. Sometimes things that couldn't possibly be there. And one of the very first success stories in radio involved audiences seeing something in the mind's eye that definitely was not there. In this case, it was a show about two African-American gentlemen who left their homes in the deep South to seek their fortune in the big city. And not everyone listening was aware that these African-American characters were being played by white actors. Freeman Gosden from North Carolina and Charles Carell from downstate Illinois. Now, let's face it, on the list of things you probably can never, ever do on television, white people impersonating African Americans is right at the top. But because it was radio, we weren't subjected to that image. We were simply absorbing the characters. And as a result, the show that Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll produced cut across all racial and demographic lines. It was that popular. So much so that, well, perhaps I can summarize with a story about another author named George Bernard Shaw, who came to the United States in the 1930s, and he was asked his opinion of this country. And he said, "There are three things I will never forget about America: the Rocky Mountains, Niagara Falls, and Amos and Andy."
And the next thing, I sort of forgot some of the words to the song I was going to sing. Couldn't get them in my head. And you know that Mrs. Van Polen and myself ain't speaking to each other, and we were supposed to sing together. Then a little thing like, I started thinking about getting up in front of all them people and something going wrong. Now that's it right there. Now you done beat around the bush. You done finally got in there where the rabbit is. Well, what's that? Well, that is that thing you talking about. That is the germ that starts the whole fever. That fear germ. Oh, I wasn't scared. You think you was. You were so nervous that all the nerves in your throat got together and said, "Let's tighten up on him." That's what your nerves say.
Now, admittedly, there is a discussion that deserves to be had concerning the racial sensitivity of white men impersonating African Americans. To some degree, that discussion was had at the time. And it's proof that whatever the intentions, not everything from 70 and 80 and 90 years ago has aged equally well. And that's a subject we'll probably return to before the day is done. But that is only part of the discussion where Amos and Andy are concerned. As we said before, Amos and Andy were phenomenally popular in a way that cut across demographic lines and racial lines as well. Part of that, of course, was to be viewed through the context of the times. In the 1930s, the United States was in the midst of an economic depression. Tens of millions of people had been out of work. Even those people who had jobs, who had money saved, there was no guarantee they weren't going to need that money sooner rather than later. And as a result, you might think twice during this time about going dancing at a nightclub, or going to see a play at a theater, or even going to the movies. And movies were fairly cheap. But radio was free. Yes, you might have to sit through a commercial for Pepsodent or Campbell's Soup, but that was a small price to pay for the chance to hear Amos and Andy 5 nights a week for free. This was not lost on theater owners, who realized they had to compete with something free, and some of them actually advertised in so many words, "If you come to the show, we promise we will stop the film at 10 o'clock so all of us can listen to Amos and Andy." And that involved stopping the film, bringing a radio into the theater, turning it on. Everyone would presumably get out of their seats and gather around the radio. Then they'd go back to their seats and watch the end of the movie. You cannot imagine that happening today for any radio or TV show, but it was a pre-TiVo world. The other thing about Amos and Andy we have to remember is that Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll came out of a theatrical tradition that was very popular in this country a century plus ago, called the minstrel show. Now, we've talked about how radio could reach both big cities and small towns. And if you were in a small town in America before the internet, before satellite communications, before interstate highways, when there was no guarantee the brick road you took out of your town wouldn't turn into a dirt road when you hit the next town, in a lot of those small towns, and what was still largely farm country, a lot of folks simply didn't go far beyond their hometown. They didn't get a lot of external stimulus in the years before radio. And into those small towns came the minstrel shows. These performers would set up a tent in the town square. They would perform songs and jokes in blackface. in a dialect. At the end of the show, they might sell a miracle elixir for $1 a bottle. And, you know, from the 20s, anything that had alcohol in it, that was your miracle right there. But again, the fact that people went to these shows didn't necessitate that they were racist. It just was because radio had yet to show us the world. Radio eventually took us to other parts of this country and to other parts of the world, where we got to meet other people and other cultures. And some jokes, as a result, that were funny a century ago didn't seem so funny in later years. That's just how times change. In fact, radio helped to destroy the minstrel show. And perhaps with no malice aforethought, it did a lot to destroy a lot of theatrical traditions that had been prevalent at the start of the 20th century. The minstrel show was one, vaudeville was another, burlesque was a third. A lot of very well-known radio performers, particularly comedians, cut their teeth in one or more of these venues. You know, performers like Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, George Allen, Ed Wynn, Fred Allen, Red Skelton. All of these folks were at the vaudeville circuit, as was another fellow, ironically, given that this is radio, a ventriloquist named Edgar Bergen. And for the record, Edgar's lips sometimes moved. But again, it was radio. We couldn't see his lips move. All we could do was imagine the conversation he was having with this little wooden boy named Charlie McCarthy. Bob Hope was another comedian who emerged from the vaudeville years primed and ready to go. Vaudeville, as George Burns said, it was a great place for a young comedian to be bad. And by the 1930s, a lot of great vaudeville performers were ready to move to radio, Bob Hope among them. Excuse me. Bob Hope used to boast that he could get 8 laughs a minute because he told a lot of jokes and he told them quickly. And, of course, he had that vaudevillian training that allowed him not only to work the crowd to get that extra laugh, but you suspect, at least early in his radio career, that he really enjoyed the challenge that came from doing so. We actually have a clip here of a Bob Hope show from 1938. It's his first season on the air for Pepsodent. In this 30-second clip, Bob tells 3 jokes. He gets 5 laughs. And I think in order to figure out how, we may have to use our imaginations, but here you go.
Yes, I did some more Christmas shopping today. I want to send my uncle something he'll like. How do you wrap up a saloon? On Christmas Day, my uncle's going to be Santa Claus in costume today. A long white beard and a bottle of Mercure Chrome. If it's a cold day, you won't need the Mercure Chrome.
Now, of course, as Paul said, we'll be happy to take any questions at the end of tonight's program for anybody who wants to submit a comment through the library's Facebook page or the YouTube page. I bring that up because I remember giving this talk at a library a few years ago, and I asked if anyone had any questions, and a gentleman said, yes, I have a question. Who here remembers mercurochrome? And yeah, I'll confess, I wasn't around for the golden age of radio, but I had firsthand experience with mercurochrome. And of course, my mother would always say, just be glad it's not iodine. And I took her at her word. Now, there were always a lot of great comedians on radio, but as in any field, there are the greats, and then there are those who somehow stand apart from the crowd, who are acknowledged even by the greats as the great ones. And where radio comedy is concerned, one of the absolute best was a fellow named Jack Benny. Jack Benny was actually born in Chicago. He was Benjamin Kubelski, and he grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, just north of Chicago. And when he started his career in vaudeville in the teens, he was a violinist. He was actually fairly good, fairly proficient, but over time, he discovered he could be funny. And with that, the violin became less of an instrument and more of a prop. And Benjamin Kubelski, after a few trials with different names, became Jack Benny. In the 1930s, Jack went to radio, as many of his peers had done. But Jack Benny was more than just a radio comedian. Jack Benny was a radio pioneer, because Jack did something that presumably someone was going to have to do someday, but he did it first. He listened to his fellow comedians on the radio, comedians he had enjoyed when they were on vaudeville together, and he noticed that many of them were acting on radio like they were still on a vaudeville stage. Now, in those days, a vaudeville theater could hold 400, 500, 600 people. And in the days before decent amplification, you would have to make sure you were being heard and seen by 400 or 500 people. But Jack Benny realized none of us listened to the radio in groups of 500 people. We listened by ourselves. We listened with our families or with a friend. In a way, it was the biggest audience any performer had ever had. You could have 20 or 30 million people listening to you, but they were doing it in groups of 1 and 2 and 3. In this environment, you were not a performer coming onto a stage. You were a guest in someone's house, and that requires a different set of rules. So Jack realized to succeed in radio, you needed a more intimate style of comedy than you would have practiced in vaudeville or burlesque. And so Jack Benny and his writers set about crafting the template for the modern situation comedy. So if you've ever heard or seen a situation comedy you've enjoyed, whether it's the Burns and Allen Show or the Dick Van Dyke Show or Frasier or the King of Queens, all of those shows owe a debt to the work of Jack Benny and his writers. Because what Jack and his writers did ultimately was to create a character by the name of Jack Benny. And this character possessed traits that in a real life person would be horrifying. You know, he was stingy, he was vain, he said he was 39, he clearly wasn't. He said he was a great violinist, he clearly wasn't. He thought of himself as a suave, sophisticated man about town, but he drove a 1927 Maxwell. That said, to Jack's credit, his Maxwell sounded very much like Mel Blanc.
Start the motor, Rochester.
Yes, sir.
Rochester, I can't understand that motor. Maybe there's some dirt on the spark plug.
There must be. There's some beautiful flowers growing there.
Now that last joke of Eddie Anderson's tells you something that made the Jack Benny program so special, and what made the character of Jack Benny so endearing when he could have been horrifying. Yes, Jack was cheap, and Jack was vain, and Jack perhaps had delusions that he was handsomer or more suave than he actually was, but everyone saw through him, including the people on his radio show, like his announcer Don Wilson, or his girlfriend Mary Livingston, or bandleader Phil Harris, or singer Dennis Day, or the great Eddie Rochester Anderson. All of them saw through him, and what's more, they let him know they saw through him. This was that rare instance of a comedian becoming everyone else's straight man, the butt of everyone else's jokes, because Jack Benny made another important discovery about radio, which was if the show was called the Jack Benny program, it ultimately didn't matter who got the laughs. As long as the show was funny, all of us would go to work or school the next day and say, "Did you hear Jack Benny last night? Wow, he's funny." And there was something else about Jack and something he brought to radio that was really unique to him. Obviously, as we've heard just now, Jack understood the importance of sound. But Jack and his writers knew that if you could get an effect with sound, you could conceivably get an effect with silence. And no one did silence on radio better than Jack Benny. The most famous joke in radio history involves the silence of Jack Benny. Jack is walking home, a man holds him up and says, "Your money or your life." And there's silence. And the audience is laughing at the silence because they know this character so well that they realize, oh, he's actually thinking it over. Now we have a clip of a Jack Benny program here from about 1940, and it covers a lot of the things we've been talking about. But something you'll probably notice is after the first 20 seconds or so, there aren't any jokes in the script at all. All of the comedy comes from the character and from the silences. In this case, Jack is on the phone with his director at Paramount Pictures, Mark Sandrich, because he's just been told that his next film for Paramount will co-star his radio nemesis, Fred Allen.
Allen, I'm going to have that guy kicked right out of California.
Oh, Jack, stop acting like a kid. Is he going to kill you to make a picture with Allen?
Don, that's a fate worse than death. Believe me.
Be reasonable, Jackson. The guy came all the way out here. What's he going to do all summer?
Let him get a tan over that jaundice of his. What do I care? In the first place, he has no...
Hello? Mr. Mark Sandridge, please.
I'd like to make a picture just once where I don't have to go through a lot of aggravation.
Hello, Mr. Sandridge. Jack Benny is calling. No, Jack Benny. Benny.
Spell it for him. It begins with a B. Hello, Miss Sandrich. This is Jack Benny, the star of Man About Town and Buck Benny Rides Again.
Why don't you mention some of the thinkers you made?
Now look, Mr. Sandridge, I thought I made it clear that I will not make a picture with Fred Allen. I don't care if he has a contract. No, his. But look, Mr. Sandridge, the guy has no class. He's a low comedian. I can't afford to be a picture with him.
Tell him you'll quit.
I quit. Mary. Now, Mr. Sandridge, but I know, but... But...
Say, Don, are you going home right after the broadcast?
Yes, I was planning to.
I know, but...
Well, I was going to give me a lift. You go right by my house.
I'll be glad to, Mary.
I know, but... But... Say, Dad, you come on with the wheelchair. Already, but oh, yeah.
But Rock never failed. Now there was great.
Hi everyone. Seems like we're having some connection issues on Mr. Darnall's end, so I'm gonna pause for just a moment and see if we can reconnect with him. Thank you for your patience.
holder. iTunes.
We are live. We are live.
Ah, wonderful. Here, I feel like the person at the help desk in overseas. Let me just.
This is probably about the 100th virtual program I've done, and I am surprised that probably maybe 5 of them I've had technical difficulties like this, so I'm not too upset.
You who've stuck around, we're going to get not necessarily to the bottom of this, but we're going to try to pick up where we left off, so at least you'll all get to hear what you came here to hear. Let's see. I have to share my screen again. And,
thank you, everyone who's still sticking around, for your patience. I see.
Yes, indeed.
Got some viewers on Facebook and YouTube still, so appreciate your patience.
Yes, thank you so much. Like I say, we were just literally saying how this never happened to either of us before. So, all right. So let's see if I can find something that we haven't. We'll just make sure you can all hear me.
It was that last audio file. It was stuttering on and off. And
all right. Well, let's see. What I'll do, I'll try to pick up with the Jack Benny clip then. All right. And
Alan, I'm going to have that guy kicked right out of California.
Oh, Jack, stop acting like a kid. Is he going to kill you to make a picture with Alan?
Don, that's a fate worse than death. Believe me.
Be reasonable, Jackson. The guy came all the way out here. What's he going to do all summer?
Let him get a tan over that jaundice of his. What do I care? In the first place, he has no...
Hello? Mr. Mark Sandridge, please.
I'd like to make a picture just once where I don't have to go through a lot of aggravation.
Hello, Mr. Sandridge. Jack Benny is calling. No, Jack Benny. Benny.
Spell it for him. It begins with a B.
B-E-N.
Give me that phone. Hello? Hello, Mr. Sandridge. This is Jack Benny, the star of Man About Town and Buck Benny Rides Again.
Why don't you mention some of those stinkers you made?
Never mind. Now look, Mr. Sandridge, I thought I made it clear that I will not make a picture with Fred Allen. I don't care if he has got a contract, tear it up. No, his. But look, Mr. Sandridge, the guy has no class. He's a low comedian. I can't afford to be in a picture with him.
Tell him you'll quit.
I quit. Mary. Now look, Mr. Sandridge, if you think I'm going to... But... I know, but...
Say, Don, are you going home right after the broadcast?
Yes, I was planning to. Why?
I know, but...
Well, I was wondering if you'd give me a lift. You go right by my house.
I'll be glad to, Mary.
I know, but...
Say, Dennis, you coming over to Wilshire Bowl tonight?
Well, I was going to, Mr. Harris, but I haven't got a date.
Come over anyway, kid. I'll get a cute girl for you.
I know, but... Get one for me, too, Phil. I know, but... Well, look, Mr. Sandwich, we might as well get this straightened out right now. I am not going to make a picture with Fred Allen. You can't team a horse with a jackass. Oh, yeah? Just say that again. Oh, yeah? Is that so?
You got your encore. Hang up.
And right to the end, someone gets the last word on Jack Benny. It never failed. Now, forgive me if any of what follows is redundant, but somehow I don't think it is. Obviously, there was great comedy on radio, but there was great everything on radio at one time or another. And if you were a fan of popular songs, there were shows that routinely featured the biggest singing stars in the country. Bing Crosby, Dinah Shore, Doris Day, Frank Sinatra, Al Jolson, Perry Como. If you were a fan of the emerging world of jump and swing music, there were shows featuring big bands broadcasting late at night from the nation's night spots. Bands led by the likes of Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, Kay Kaiser and his College of Musical Knowledge. And something that still impresses me, you know, we talked about small town America and what was largely farm country, and how maybe if you lived 50 or 100 miles from a major metropolitan city, it might have been a challenge to actually visit that city on any regular basis. But thanks to radio, people across the country, in the big cities and the small towns, every Sunday afternoon could hear New York's Metropolitan Opera. How many lives were changed forever because of the Metropolitan Opera on radio? But one area where radio really proved itself to be special was in the field of drama. Now, radio comedy, as we've heard, could use sound to poke fun at reality. But radio drama could use sound that would take us into a whole new reality. And it might be through one of the police or detective shows like Dragnet or Gangbusters. And for those of you who don't know the phrase, the opening of Gangbusters was, to borrow a phrase, what we would call in your face. It was loud. It was attention-getting. It had marching feet and police whistles and burglar alarms and machine gun fire, and was so boisterous that it literally gave birth to the phrase, "You are coming on like gangbusters." So if anyone's ever said that to you, now you know why. But of course, there were also the mystery and horror shows like Lights Out and Inner Sanctum with that famous creaking door, Suspense, radio's outstanding theater of thrills, and The Whistler, who knew many things, for he walked by night. And all of these shows use sound to take us out of our world and into theirs. You know, you knew when you heard the creaking door of the inner sanctum, you were headed someplace truly terrifying. You knew when you heard the 13-note melody of the Whistler that you were going to hear stories about men and women who had stepped into the shadows. And on a Sunday afternoon, when you heard the organist playing Ormfale's Spinning Wheel, you knew the shadow was stepping out to meet you.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Ah, the Shadow, the mysterious character who aids the forces of law and order, who was in reality Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town. Now, years ago in the Orient, Cranston had learned the strange hypnotic power to cloud men's minds so they cannot see him. And Cranston's friend and companion, the lovely Margot Lane, is the only person who knows to whom the voice of the invisible shadow belongs. Except for us. Right? What a great secret to have. Radio was so good at these kinds of secrets. And every week the shadow would do battle with gangsters, with terrorists, with mad scientists, and every week proved demonstrably that the weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Now, I've talked about the magic of radio, and I want to expand a little on that, or perhaps just sort of give you a feel for how the tricks were performed. You know, let's say we're at the Mutual Broadcasting Systems studios on a Sunday afternoon in New York, and we're in the audience to watch The Shadow. Now, on the stage, there's a man at a microphone, script in hand, because it's radio. You know, it doesn't matter if you memorize your lines. It's not like the theater. No one can see. So you might as well have him in front of you. He's our villain. Not far from him is another microphone, another actor, script in hand. He's the Shadow, but he has a filter on his microphone because that's how you apparently sound invisible. So now you know. Adjacent to them is a table. That's where the sound effects people perform. They are the ones whose job it is to demonstrate with sound what words do not tell us. So if someone is walking, you know, is it the quick click of high heels or the heavy tread of an oversized boot? If someone's operating machinery, is it a small hypersonic device or some large industrial turbine? Then you have the organist, whose job it is to play the music that indicates when a scene is ending and another scene is beginning, and perhaps punctuate things for emphasis. And all of this is being watched over by a director, whose job it is to use hand signals to tell people, start doing something, or stop doing something, or do something faster because we have less time than we thought. And all of these elements come together like a symphony orchestra. And it's important to remember this: they're doing it live. The vast majority of national radio broadcasts were live. The potential for disaster was enormous. But the fact is, there were so few disasters, which speaks so well of the professionalism of everyone involved. Everyone who came together so that we could hear something in 1940 that otherwise should not exist. In this case, the Shadow and Margot Lane are trapped in a room with a mad scientist and his giant robot.
You see that robot? He is my servant, my slave, obedient to my every command. He is not bound by human limitations. He can see you, Shadow. He can see you. Wherever you are in this room, he will find you. When he does, I think you know what the result will be.
What?
You will be crushed. Crushed to bits in his arms. You and the young lady, too.
Dr. Zaruga, you've chosen a dangerous game. But let me warn you, two can play it, remember?
You can't talk yourself out of this, Shadow. Robert, find this man. Rush him.
I've warned you, Dr. Zaruga.
You warned me. At last, Shadow, you've met your match. What avails man's might against a machine?
I agree with you, Dr. Zaruga. So I think we better eliminate the machine.
What caught me? What are you trying to do?
I'm interested in knowing what's under your coat, Dr. Zaruga.
No! Robert! Robert, help me! Let me go.
Yeah, your robot doesn't move very swiftly, does he? Now there. Good off. Well, an electrical control box.
I'll touch that box. Don't touch it, I say.
So that's your secret, Doctor. This contraption was a hump on your back, which controlled the other robot that day at the fair.
Give me that box.
Oh, no, Doctor.
You think you've gained the upper hand, eh? Shadow will not show you. You're still my prisoner in this room. You can't leave here and you won't ever leave here, ever.
Where are your great powers now, Zaruga?
I'll show you, I'll show you. I can operate the robot by hand.
Keep away from that robot, Zaruga. Keep away.
I'll show you. All I have to do is pick up this lever. No, Robert. You misunderstood. Not me. Not me, you fool. It's just me. Let me go. It's crushing me.
Well, I hope this has proven forcibly to young and old alike that crime does not pay. The Shadow knows. Now, of course, there was great radio any night of the week. You know, Sunday afternoons you had The Shadow. Sunday evenings you had Jack Benny and Fred Allen and Charlie McCarthy. Monday evenings you had the Lux Radio Theater, which dramatized popular films, often with the original stars. Tuesday nights you had Bob Hope and Red Skelton. Saturday nights you had the Your Hit Parade, which counted down the top tunes of the week. And here in Chicago, there was a program called the National Barn Dance, the first show to air nationally devoted to this nascent music of American folk known as country. And it was so successful that the next year, WSM in Nashville decided to try their own version of the barn dance called the Grand Ole Opry. And clearly it succeeded. 96 years later, it's still with us. But there was also radio during the day. Now, we were not yet open 24 hours a day as a nation. But the fact is that radio stations might sign on in the morning. They might run for 10 or 12 or 18 hours, might sign off at night, at sundown, or at midnight or 1 a.m. But when they were broadcasting in the best sense of the word, in an effort to be all things to all people, something for everyone. And that meant, of course, radio for adults, but it also meant radio for youngsters. And if you were a child during the golden age of radio, you might be finished with school around 3:30, but you might have some chores, you might have some homework, you might play with your friends, but you wanted to get that out of the way by 4:30, 5 o'clock, because that's when radio got really good. That's when the adventure shows were on. Shows like Captain Midnight, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, The Adventures of Superman. And of course, if you could finish dinner quickly enough, get back to the radio at 6:30 or so, you could hear one of the great adventure shows out of WXYZ in Detroit, like The Challenge of the Yukon, featuring Sergeant Preston and his wonder dog, Yukon King. They had one even more popular than that, however, called The Green Hornet, featuring daring young publisher Britt Reed and his valet Cato. And they had one even more popular than that, featuring a fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty "Hi-Yo Silver," The Lone Ranger. Ran for 22 years on radio. Now, here are some of the other popular juvenile adventure shows of the era. It's possible, if you were of a certain age, that you might have heard some of these growing up. And you might have made what I was told by my family was a great sacrifice and consumed Ovaltine. I know my mother used to say, she so wanted that Norden bomb sight they were offering on the Captain Midnight show, and she had to drink a lot of Ovaltine to get it, but she got it. Here's some other shows with or without Ovaltine.
The Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters are on the air. And here comes Tom Mix, America's favorite cowboy. Hi, Tony, come on, boy.
Who's that little chatterbox? The one with pretty auburn locks. Whom do you see? It's little orphan Annie.
They're riding fast and they're riding hard. It's time for excitement and adventure in the modern West with Bobby Benson and the B-Bar-B Riders.
Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Now, The Adventures of Sky King. NBC presents The Adventures of Frank Mariwell.
And of course, there were many more where those came from. Many of them taken from the comic books and comic strips that had become so popular in recent years, like Hop Harrigan, America's Ace of the Airways, or Terry and the Pirates, Mandrake the Magician, Mark Trail, a whole lot of others. But let's say you're a child during the golden age of radio and there is no school. Maybe it's summer, like it is now. Maybe it's a holiday. Maybe you're sick. You're stuck in bed. Well, the radio might still be on in those circumstances, but it would probably be tuned to the shows that a mother would listen to. Now, the technical term for these shows is daytime dramatic serials. But the fact is, many of them were sponsored by soap manufacturers. Hence the term soap opera. And it wasn't meant as a compliment. And yes, it's very easy to deride soap operas from 70 and 80 years ago as being implausible or melodramatic. Of course they were. But again, to view that through the context of the times, it's a time when it's not yet common for husbands and wives to both go to work. So if you were a housewife, you were a mother during the golden age of radio, your job was the house. You're the one who had to be up to put breakfast and lunch and dinner on the table. So you could send them off, your husband and children off to work and school, get them back and send them off for the rest of the day. And then, of course, in between all the meal preparation, there's cleaning, there's dusting, there's ironing, there's sewing, there's washing. A lot of very solitary activities at a time when we should remember telephones are attached to the wall. So yes, the days when we could walk around in our garden with a phone in one hand, those are still off in the future. But thanks to the soap operas, these solitary tasks weren't being performed in total solitude. There were other voices, other stories in which the housewives and mothers of America could immerse themselves. And this is just my theory, I think the soap operas were also a way of telling the housewives of America, we understand if you think this is all drudgery. We appreciate that. On the other hand, you've got it so easy compared to Mary Noble, backstage wife. You know, compared to Stella Dallas, your life is great. And most of us usually had fewer travails than Stella Dallas. So what we have here is a little montage of some of the popular daytime dramatic serials of radio's golden age. This first one I think will actually be known to a lot of you because it ran on radio for 2 decades. And before it was over, it moved to television, where it ran for 53 years. A show called The Guiding Light.
The Guiding Light. Brought to you by the makers of P&G soap.
Life can be beautiful. An inspiring message of faith drawn from life, written for you each weekday by Carl Bixby and Don Becker.
Oxidol, Bone Ma Perkins. Now, Ivory Soap's own story, The Right to Happiness. Maxwell House, the coffee that's always good to the last drop, brings you Wendy Warren and the news.
Hello, folks. This is Wendy Warren with News Report.
And now Crisco presents Joyce Jordan, M.D.
Calling Dr. Jordan.
When a Girl Marries, a story of young who has ever been in love.
Wash Your Face's Life, starring Lucille Wall.
Once again, we present Our Gal Sunday, the story that asks the question, can this girl from a little mining town in the West find happiness as the wife of a wealthy and titled Englishman?
I suppose we've all asked ourselves that question at one time or another. Well, the answer, spoiler alert, is yes, although it took 22 years to find out. And these are just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. You know, there were so many other daytime dramas in that era. You know, shows like Just Plain Bill, Young Dr. Malone, the granddaddy of family drama, One Man's Family, The Rise of the Goldbergs. One of my personal favorites, The Romance of Helen Trent, about a woman who longs to prove what so many women long to prove, that because a woman is 35 years of age or more, romance in life need not be over. I know, it gets sillier sounding every year, doesn't it? Yes. But again, this is part of what makes these shows so fascinating, is, as we said earlier, not everything from 60 and 70 and 80 years ago has aged equally well. That's to be expected. Not everything from 2021 will age equally well. But those shows that are of their time, they tell us so much about that time. They tell us about the way we listened, the way we lived, the way we thought we should live. They tell us about how we thought of family and neighborhood and community. They tell us how we bought our soap and our cigarettes. And then there are the shows that have aged well. And I am pleased to report that they are just as funny and dramatic and frightening and musical as they were when they were broadcast generations earlier. And what a nice legacy for a performer to have, to do this thing that they thought would be heard once and then never again, and then find out that 60 and 70 and 80 years later, people are still enjoying it. That in mind, there's one thing we haven't talked about, and I'd like to present now a word from our sponsor. I know. No, wait, don't go. Thought you were all getting out of here scot-free, didn't you? No, if you have enjoyed this show, as Paul mentioned, I have the good fortune to host a radio show every Saturday dedicated to the golden age of radio. It's called Those Were the Days. That's our logo back there behind me. We're heard every Saturday afternoon. In the Midwest, it's 1 to 5 Central Time. And for those of you who are outside of the Chicago area, you can hear it live on the internet at wdcb.org. And as it happens, this coming Saturday, we're going to have a lot of very rare broadcasts from the late 1920s and early 30s, featuring Charles Lindbergh receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Calvin Coolidge. We'll hear a young Hoagie Carmichael, an even younger Don Amici. We'll hear a very special dedication broadcast and a whole lot. Also, the Dental Clinic of the Air. So I hope you'll join us. Now, we publish the schedule in a magazine called the Nostalgia Digest, and this is the new issue right here with Ernie Kovacs on the cover. There are a lot of articles inside about the golden age of entertainment, radio, music, movies, early TV, in this case, Ernie Kovacs, and of course, the schedule for those were the days, in case you're wondering, gosh, what's coming up on July 17th? It's all here. Our subscribers make it possible for us to do what we do, so if you subscribe, we thank you. If you'd like to subscribe or learn more about the magazine or the radio show, we hope you'll visit us at nostalgiadigest.com. That's the website. That's where you can not only subscribe to the magazine and get back issues, you can hear previous broadcasts of Those Were the Days, including our recent Father's Day program. It's also where you can pick up radio shows, some of which you've heard today, on compact disc. So we hope you'll check us out. Now, obviously, commercials were kind of a necessary evil during the golden age of radio. If you wanted big name money, talent, someone had to shell out big money. They were going to want something in return. Thankfully, there were people who realized that commercials didn't have to be evil. And some people were smart enough to realize it would work to your advantage if the commercials were as entertaining as the rest of the show. Once again, Jack Benny took the lead, going back to 1932, when he was on the air for Canada Dry, and he actually told the story about a girlfriend whose uncle had been to every night spot in New York, and now he was going north to drink Canada Dry. And some of you may know Jack and his writers got a lot better at this over time with the commercials they did for Jell-O and Lucky Strike cigarettes, but perhaps the most famous examples of a commercial working its way into the entertainment are the commercials that Harlow Wilcox did for the Johnson Wax Company opposite Jim and Marion Jordan, or as we knew them, Fibber McGee and Molly.
Well, as soon as I get the knack of keeping it burning, I'll show you what.
Hello, Molly. Hi, pal. Well, when did you start smoking a pipe?
You mean when will he start, Mr. Wilcox? As soon as he gets it lit. Give him another 3 days.
It's a new pipe, Junior. New pipes don't stay lit good.
I've got a TL for you, pal. Old pipes don't stay lit any better.
No?
But where'd you get that heater, pal? Christmas present?
He got it at Kramer's drugstore on a bargain offer, Mr. Wilcox.
Yep.
It was free with 7 pounds of old saddle blanket tobacco.
It was 3 pounds of old mustard mouth tobacco.
Oh.
Well, I'm afraid you got the short end of that offer, pal. The only way Kramer can sell that loco weed is to throw something in with it.
Oh, yeah?
And you'd be surprised what people have suggested.
There are all kinds of bargain offers, I guess, Mr. Wilcox.
My, for gosh sakes, don't you realize?
I'm glad you said that, Molly.
What'd I say?
Oh, you said
About bargain offers, because you're so right. Now take the new Glow Coat offer, for instance.
Molly, you see what
I didn't do a pick. I
The Glow Coat dealers have a bargain that is a bargain, Molly.
Order on him.
The chance for more people to get acquainted with the new 1949 Glow Coat. An offer that gives you 1/3 more of this wonderful self-polishing floor wax for the same money. Think of it, 1/3 more, no extra cost.
Yeah, but have you got...
Of course, Glow Coat has always saved housewives time and effort in keeping their linoleum bright and gleaming, Molly, because it shines as it dries to a beautiful luster and needs no rubbing or buffing. But now Glow Coat saves you money, too.
You got a match, Junior. This pipe...
So if anybody asks you, Molly, just tell them to check with their nearest dealer for the new offer on the new Glow Coat with the new glow. Because the new Glow Coat with the new glow...
Hey, look. Waxy.
Yes, pal?
Can you tell me how I can keep this pipe lit?
Sure, get some different tobacco, pal.
Yeah?
That old mustard mouth is no good.
No?
My cousin, Big Misham Wilcox, the radio actor, used to smoke that.
Oh.
And what happened to him?
His skin turned sort of a mailbox green.
Oh.
My gosh, that's awful.
Yeah, but he looks sensational on television.
Well, on behalf of everyone who makes it possible to share these sounds with you, especially all of these great performers and their colleagues, I want to say a big thank you to Paul and everyone at the Garland County Library for hosting this event this evening. Technical difficulties and all, it's always a pleasure to get to talk about the golden age of radio. And one of the things I've gotten to learn firsthand over the last year as I work with libraries across the country on virtual programs is how they've all responded to this pandemic in ways that go far beyond simply providing all of us with more books than we can possibly read in our entire lives. You know, Paul was saying this is, I guess, the 100th virtual program he's done in the last year. What's more impressive is that libraries do this with an infinitesimal amount of a tax dollar. And so I say this, please support public libraries every chance you get. What's more, if you meet someone who does not share this philosophy, I urge you to view them with great suspicion and mistrust. They've earned that. That said, to all of you who toughed it out while we shut down and started up again this evening, thank you for your patience. And thank you so much for listening. And Paul, I know you mentioned there might be some questions or comments from folks, and if we want to, I'll be happy to answer any that have come in.
Well, we have a few comments. I want to give a shout out first of all to George on YouTube, who's watching all the way from Idaho.
Hello, George.
And he tried to keep people interested while we were having technical difficulties, asked if anyone had a good joke. And no one responded to him, but maybe you have a good final joke you'd like to share with us from the golden age there.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, probably a few, but heavens, see if I can find a one that comes to mind offhand. Oh, Josh, yeah, I'm on the spot here.
Well, you don't have to tell it.
I do. There's a great joke involving Fred Allen, the comedian. Fred Allen was known for topical humor, which of course doesn't always age well. But at one point, he was talking with his wife, Portland Hoffa, on the air about daylight savings time and how, of course, everyone would turn the clocks back 1 hour. And Portland Hoffa asked, if we all turn the clocks back 1 hour, does that mean we all get an hour younger? And Fred Allen said, yes. In fact, if you turned the hands of a grandfather clock back far enough, it would become a little boy clock with a small face and dirty hands. Bada-boom.
Like it.
Oh, there you go. Yes, Paul, thank you, obviously, for all you did to keep the wheels turning during this time, and to all of you, again, who toughed it out during our little technical snafu. I do appreciate it a lot.
I'm glad in this case we had a cell phone so I could stay at the computer and didn't have to run to a phone on the wall.
The irony is I put my phone in the next room because I was afraid it would ring during the program. So
that's why it took 10 times.
Yes, if you saw me not here all of a sudden, that's why. But and to all of you, like I say, I hope you'll join us on Saturday afternoons, either if you're in the Chicago area at 90.9 FM. If you're not in the Chicago area, definitely at wdcb.org. And
got one more comment I'd like to read to you. This one's from Diana, and she actually works at the local U.S. stations here in Hot Springs. And she said, I like to think we are still in the golden age.
You know, that's true. Golden age of radio is one of those amorphous terms. You know, it's certainly possible to have more than one, depending on when you're coming into it. You're right. If you and I are both on the radio, it feels like a golden age to me. You know, I think people, it's sort of like in any field, the golden age of Hollywood was a certain era, and then after that came another great age. You know, I mean, not to take away from the Scorseses and the George Lucases of the world. But, you know, I think there was something very special about the people who were there first and foremost, because they created the template that a lot of us have followed, whether it's people who play music on the radio or people who read the news or people who, you know, queue up shows from 60 and 70 years ago. Obviously, you couldn't have done that 80 years ago. But, you know, the fact is, yeah, that there were a lot of folks who who started out doing the things that all of us have been following up with ever since. So yes, to all of you who are working in radio today, congratulations and thanks. And I think all of you will join me in thanking the people who took the first steps so that we could take much smaller steps and much easier steps from here on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to think of, the golden age doesn't have, we use the phrase golden age in many different areas and doesn't have to be the peak. When it comes to Disney movies, the fan terms for the ages, the golden age was, back from Snow White through Bambi, but then the 90s, when The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, those are sometimes considered the best movies, and they call that the Renaissance of Disney.
Sure, of course. Yeah, and I've written comic books, and of course that's another era, another genre where they have a golden age, and then I guess after that they had a silver age, and then after that they had a bronze age. So yes, the various.
And then some people's favorite comics are from the early 2000s.
Well, of course, yes. I know. In fact, it's funny. I just did a book for Marvel Comics called Marvel with my friend Alex Ross, and it was a 6-issue series. And apparently, the one issue for which Alex did all the covers, but the one that sold the best was the one that had Deadpool on the cover. And Alex has no particular connection to Deadpool, but of course, if you were born in 1988, my God, of course you know Deadpool. You're going to know Deadpool before you know Captain America, for goodness sake. So yes, I understand a lot of folks, the golden age of movies, music, radio, probably has a lot to do with when you were born. But, for a lot of folks, it was that time when radio was truly a theater of the mind, and with no disrespect to anyone in contemporary radio, that was an era that really set the bar high where using one's imagination was concerned. And that's one reason I think people remember it so fondly.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you very much. I know you have several other programs that you do, so we'll discuss those here in the near future and maybe book you for a follow-up program of some kind.
Thank you. I'll try to get a new computer in the meantime.
it was bound to happen. And so are there any final remarks you would like to make before we say good night to the audience?
No, I think we've covered most everything, and as I say, we've got a lot of shows that I'm very much looking forward to presenting on those for the days. Obviously, this weekend with radio from the 20s and early 30s, we're going to have an afternoon of the big bands on July 3rd. In the weeks ahead, we'll hear Jack Webb and Fred Allen and Lucille Ball and Milton Berle and Jackie Gleason and Orson Welles and a lot of other really talented folks. But yes, to all of you, thank you for being a part of tonight's program, because as we say at the end of every radio show, those of you listening are what make this all worthwhile. So, and especially on nights like this when technical challenges threaten to drive us apart. So thanks to all of you, and Paul, thanks to you and your team for bringing us together.
Absolutely. Thank you as well, and thank everyone for watching. Have a good night.
Thanks, folks.